Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Quiet Architect. Anthony Russo didn't believe in luck. As a structural engineer who had clawed his way up from the south side of Boston, he trusted only in precision, careful planning, and hard work. His calloused hands and the permanent crease between his brows told the story of a man who had never been handed anything in life. At 42, Tony had built a modest life for himself, his wife Melanie, their 5-year-old son Peter, and his mother Rose, who had moved in with them after her stroke 2 years ago. Their 3-bedroom home in a middle-class neighborhood wasn't extravagant, but it was theirs, or at least the bank's for another 20 years. "You're pushing yourself too hard again," Rose observed one evening as Tony pored over blueprints at the dining table, his third cup of coffee gone cold beside him. "Big project coming up, Ma. Could mean promotion." He rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar tension headache building. "We need the money." Rose's weathered hand covered his. Melanie called. Said she'd be late again. Tony nodded, the muscle in his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Melanie's networking events had been happening more frequently lately. As the ambitious marketing director for Highline Properties, a real estate firm owned by her parents, the wealthy Prescotts, she was always chasing the next big client. The Prescotts had never approved of Tony. Walter and Diana Prescott had built their fortune developing luxury properties across New England, and their only daughter was supposed to marry within their social circle. Instead, she had fallen for Tony during a charity build where his firm had volunteered. Their whirlwind romance had culminated in marriage just 6 months later, much to the Prescotts' dismay. "Daddy," Peter's excited voice broke through Tony's thoughts as small feet thundered down the stairs. "Can we work on our model bridge?" Tony's expression softened, the tension lines around his eyes crinkling into something warmer. The architectural model kits were their special ritual, time carved out from his punishing work schedule to nurture his son's budding interest in building things. "Let me finish these calculations first, buddy. Then we've got a date with that suspension bridge." He ruffled Peter's sandy hair, so like his own. As Tony helped Peter with the intricate model later that evening, his phone buzzed with a text from Melanie, running later than expected. "Don't wait up." The twinge of suspicion that had been growing over the past months surfaced again, but Tony pushed it down. Their marriage had been strained lately, but they'd get through it. They always did. He was nothing if not patient when it came to building something meant to last. What Tony didn't know as he tucked Peter into bed that night was that the foundation he'd so carefully constructed was already compromised, hairline fractures spreading through its core. And unlike the buildings he designed, this collapse would come without warning. Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage. Melanie Russo-Ney Prescott had always lived in the spotlight. As the only child of Walter and Diana Prescott, she had been groomed since birth to be the perfect heiress, poised, ambitious, and accustomed to luxury. Private schools, summers in the Hamptons, debutante balls. Her life had been a carefully choreographed dance of privilege. "Darling, you're not seriously considering this, construction worker?" Diana had asked incredulously when Melanie first mentioned Tony. "He's a structural engineer, mother, with a master's degree." But her defense had fallen on deaf ears. The whirlwind romance with Anthony Russo had been her first real act of rebellion. Quiet, serious Tony with his capable hands and unwavering focus had seemed like an anchor in her world of superficial connections and family expectations. Their wedding had been modest by Prescott standards, but lavish by Tony's, a compromise that had satisfied neither family. The Prescotts, determined to protect their only daughter's inheritance, had insisted on a prenuptial agreement so thorough it had taken Tony 3 days to read through it with a family lawyer. He had signed without complaint, telling Melanie he wasn't after her family's money. His pride had seemed noble then. It irritated her now. 7 years into their marriage, Melanie found herself increasingly suffocated by the life she'd chosen. Tony's long hours, their modest home, the responsibility of caring for his aging mother. None of it aligned with the glamorous future she had imagined. Even her position at her parents' company felt like a consolation prize rather than the partnership she deserved. "You look distracted," said Bradford Klein, the firm's newest development director, during their third private strategy meeting that week. They sat close together at the bar of the Four Seasons, their marketing materials long forgotten. At 45, Bradford exuded the confidence of a man who had built his fortune through both charm and ruthlessness. His tailored suits and carefully cultivated physique spoke of a man who invested in appearances. He had joined Highline Properties 4 months ago, bringing with him connections to international investors that had impressed even Walter Prescott. "Just thinking about the Westbrook presentation," Melanie lied, sipping her martini. She didn't mention the argument she'd had with Tony that morning about her frequent late nights, or the way her heart raced when Bradford's hand brushed hers. "I've been meaning to ask you something." Bradford leaned closer, his cologne expensive and subtle. "Why are you still just the marketing director? With your talents and connections, you should be running this company alongside your father." The question peered straight to the heart of Melanie's growing dissatisfaction. "My father believes in earning your place," she said carefully, "and I've been distracted with family obligations." Bradford's laugh was low and knowing. "Family obligations? Like that little house in the suburbs? The husband who works 60 hours a week but still can't afford to buy you the things you deserve." Melanie stiffened, defensive despite herself. "Tony provides for us." "Does he?" Bradford's eyes held hers. "Look at your watch, Melanie. It's a Timex in a world where you should be wearing Cartier. You were born for more than this middle-class purgatory." His words crystallized something that had been forming inside her for years, a sense that she had made a terrible mistake, that she was wasting her potential, her birthright. The life she shared with Tony suddenly seemed like a prison rather than the refuge she had once sought. What Bradford couldn't see as he signaled for another round was the calculation beginning behind Melanie's perfectly made-up eyes. She had always been her father's daughter, pragmatic, ambitious, and willing to take risks when the potential reward was high enough. "I should get home," she said, gathering her things. "To what?" Bradford asked, his hand covering hers. "To whom?" The question hung between them, laden with possibilities Melanie had been trying not to contemplate. What neither of them knew was that fate was about to deal a card that would change everything. A lottery ticket purchased on impulse that would catalyze the collapse of carefully constructed facades. Chapter 3. Fault Lines. Vincent Moretti had known Tony Russo since they were kids throwing rocks at abandoned warehouses in South Boston. Now, as Tony's oldest friend and a detective with Boston PD, Vince was one of the few people who saw through Tony's stoic exterior. "You look like hell," Vince observed bluntly as they met for their monthly beer at O'Malley's, the dive bar halfway between the police station and Tony's office. Tony took a long pull from his beer. "Just tired. Got the Harbor Heights project on top of everything else." Vince's eyes narrowed. "Everything else being?" Tony hesitated. Admitting his marriage was in trouble felt like failure, and Anthony Russo didn't fail. "Melanie's been distant, working late a lot. Some new hotshot at her parents' company has her doing all these late meetings." "You trust her?" Vince asked, direct as always. "Should I not?" Tony countered, a dangerous edge in his voice. Vince held up his hands. "Hey, just asking. You know cops, suspicious by nature." The truth was, Tony didn't know what to think anymore. The passionate woman he'd married seemed increasingly like a stranger, irritated by his work hours, dismissive of his achievements, and constantly comparing their life to the luxury she'd grown up with. "Her parents still treating you like the help?" Vince asked, changing the subject slightly. Tony's laugh was humorless. "Walter offered me a job again last month. Said I could move into management at one of their construction subsidiaries. Translation: stop getting your hands dirty and we might finally accept you. You told him to shove it, I hope." In more polite terms, "I built my career without their help, and I'm not about to start taking handouts now." Tony's pride was both his strength and his weakness, something Melanie had once admired and now seemed to resent. What Tony didn't mention to Vince was the argument that had followed. Melanie accusing him of being stubborn and self-righteous, Tony questioning whether she had ever really respected his work at all. "How's the kid doing?" Vince asked, sensing Tony needed a change of subject. At this, Tony genuinely smiled. Peter's amazing. Smart as hell. Building things already. Can you believe it? Kid's gonna be an engineer like his old man. And your mom? Good days and bad. The physical therapy's helping, but Tony trailed off, the weight of responsibility evident. After Rosa's stroke, moving her into their home had been the only option. Tony refused to put her in a nursing facility, despite Melanie's increasingly vocal suggestions. As the night progressed, Tony found himself uncharacteristically opening up about the growing distance between him and Melanie, the financial strain of his mother's medical bills, and his frustration with being constantly measured against the Prescott family's wealth and influence. Sometimes I think she regrets choosing me, Tony admitted after his third beer. Like she woke up one day and realized she traded her golden ticket for a blue-collar guy with calloused hands and a mortgage. Vince studied his friend. You ever regret signing that prenup? Tony shook his head firmly. Never wanted their money. Just wanted her. What Tony didn't say was how the prenuptial agreement had become a symbol of everything wrong in their marriage. The fundamental imbalance, the Prescott's assumption that he was after their fortune, and most painfully, Melanie's apparent acceptance of that narrative. Neither man could have predicted how significant that legal document would soon become, or how the fault lines in the Russo marriage were about to rupture completely. Across town, in a luxury downtown condo Bradford Klein called home, Melanie lay awake beside her lover, watching the city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows. Their affair had begun just 6 weeks ago, but already Bradford was painting pictures of the life they could have together, a life of luxury, influence, and freedom from the domestic obligations that had come to feel like chains. You deserve better than being stuck in that suburban prison with a husband who doesn't appreciate you, Bradford murmured, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Melanie thought about Tony at home with Peter and her mother-in-law, probably still working on blueprints at the dining table. There had been love there once, genuine and strong. But love, she was learning, wasn't always enough to sustain a life that increasingly felt like a compromise she hadn't fully understood when making it. What Melanie didn't yet realize was that she stood at a crossroads, and that her next decision would set in motion events that would reveal just how little she knew about the quiet man she had married, and the depths he would go to when betrayed. Chapter 4. The Winning Ticket. The convenience store on the corner of Maple and 3rd wasn't part of Melanie's usual routine. Her world consisted of her office downtown, upscale restaurants where she met clients, and occasionally the organic grocery store near their home. But today, running late for a rendezvous with Bradford and stuck in unexpected traffic, she had impulsively pulled over to grab a bottle of water. The line was long. Payday meant everyone was buying lottery tickets, dream chasing on a Friday afternoon. On a whim born of boredom and the infectious excitement of the crowd, Melanie purchased a ticket when her turn came. First time playing? Asked the cashier, noticing her hesitation over which game to choose. Is it that obvious? She smiled, selecting the Mega Millions option. My husband says these are just a tax on people who can't do math. Your husband sounds like a practical man, the cashier remarked, printing her ticket. Too practical sometimes, Melanie murmured, tucking the ticket into her purse before hurrying back to her car. That night, as she sat with Bradford in his condo, the lottery drawing played on the television in the background. Bradford was outlining his latest proposal to expand Highline Properties internationally, a plan he wanted her to present to her father. Walter respects you, even if he doesn't show it, Bradford insisted. If you backed this proposal. Wait, Melanie interrupted, her attention caught by the television where numbers were being announced. On a hunch, she dug through her purse for the forgotten ticket. The next 60 seconds transformed Melanie Russo's life. 6 numbers matched. 6. Bradford was the first to realize what had happened, grabbing his phone to check the jackpot amount. $10 million. He breathed, staring at Melanie with new intensity. You just won $10 million. The implications crashed through Melanie's mind in rapid succession. Freedom. Power. Options she hadn't dared consider before. With this kind of money, she wouldn't need her parents' approval. Wouldn't need to endure Tony's stubborn pride or their modest life. Bradford's mind was racing even faster. This changes everything, he said, voice dropping to an intimate whisper. You know that, right? This is your chance to start over. No more compromises. As Melanie stared at the winning ticket, 7 years of marriage began to realign in her mind. The money now represented a wall between her past and future. In that moment, without fully articulating it even to herself, she made a decision about who belonged on which side of that wall. I need to go, she said suddenly. Bradford caught her arm. To do what? Tell your husband so he can claim half? Think, Melanie. Massachusetts is a marital property state. What if you left him first? The calculation was clear in Bradford's eyes, and Melanie found herself nodding slowly. The practical part of her brain, the part most like her father, was already formulating a plan. I need to get some things from the house, she said. Important documents. And then we need to talk to a lawyer before I claim the ticket. What Melanie didn't say was that she also needed to see Tony one last time. Needed to look at the life she was about to discard and know absolutely that she was making the right choice. As she drove home, rehearsing what she would say, the excitement of the win mingled with a strange sense of destiny. This wasn't just luck, it was validation. The universe confirming she was meant for more than the life she'd settled for. She pulled into her driveway, noticing Tony's car was gone, probably working late again. Perfect. She could gather what she needed and be gone before he returned. But as she entered the house, she found her mother-in-law watching television with Peter. You're home early, Rose observed, eyes sharp despite her frail body. Just picking up some work files, Melanie lied smoothly. Is Tony working late? Emergency at the Harbor Heights site. Structural issue they needed him to check. Rose's tone held a hint of pride that grated on Melanie. He called and asked me to tell you he'd be home late. Melanie nodded absently, already moving toward their home office. She needed her birth certificate, their marriage license, financial documents, anything a lawyer would need. As she collected them, her wedding ring caught the light, suddenly feeling like a shackle rather than a symbol. Her phone buzzed with a text from Bradford. Lawyer friend says we need to move fast before news gets out. Coming over? The message crystallized her resolve. With one last look around the house, at Peter's drawings on the refrigerator, at the family photos lining the hallway, at the life she was choosing to leave behind, Melanie made her final decision. I have to go back to the office, she told Rose, kissing Peter's forehead. Don't wait up. What Melanie couldn't know, as she pulled out of the driveway, was that Tony had also received a call that evening. Not from the Harbor Heights project, but from Vincent Moretti, who had some interesting information about Bradford Klein that couldn't wait until morning. Chapter 5, The Betrayal. Tony Russo's day had gone from bad to worse. The structural issue at Harbor Heights had been a legitimate emergency that took hours to resolve. Then came Vince's call about Bradford Klein, a man Tony had never met, but whose name had been appearing with increasing frequency in Melanie's conversations. Klein's got a reputation, Vince had said bluntly. Been looking into him since you mentioned him. 3 divorces, all messy. History of dating married women, specifically ones with money or connections. And get this, he was investigated for fraud at his last firm. Charges dropped, but where there's smoke. The information had settled like concrete in Tony's stomach. He wasn't naive. The late nights, the distraction, the new clothes and perfume. He'd recognized the signs, but had been unwilling to confront what they might mean. Now, driving home well after midnight, he felt a cold clarity descending. Tony pulled into his driveway at 1:17 a.m., surprised to see lights still on and an unfamiliar luxury SUV parked outside. As he approached the front door, he could hear voices, Melanie's and a man's, along with his mother's more frail tone. He entered quietly, moving down the hallway toward the living room. What he saw there stopped him cold in the doorway. Bradford Klein, it had to be him, matching the description Vince had given, sat in Tony's favorite armchair like he owned the place. His muscular frame was casually draped in a designer suit that probably cost more than Tony made in a month. On his lap sat Peter, seemingly enchanted by whatever story the stranger was telling him. Beside them on the couch was Melanie, her body language more animated and alive than Tony had seen in months. And most surprisingly, Rose sat there too, her usual protective hostility toward outsiders notably absent. The domestic tableau, his family gathered around this stranger, hit Tony like a physical blow. For a moment, no one noticed him standing there, giving Tony precious seconds to compose his face into an unreadable mask. "What the hell is happening?" he finally asked, his voice cutting through their laughter. For heads turned toward him. Peter's face lit up momentarily before registering the tension that suddenly electrified the room. Rose looked caught, guilty. Bradford looked amused, if anything. But it was Melanie's expression that told Tony everything he needed to know, cold, dismissive, almost relieved that the moment had finally arrived. "Tony," she said, standing up with a new confidence that seemed to radiate from her. "We need to talk." "In private," Tony suggested, eyes never leaving Bradford, who had set Peter aside and risen to his full height, several inches taller than Tony. "No need," Melanie replied, her voice steady. "Bradford is family now. At least he will be." Tony felt the ground shifting beneath him. "Will be." Melanie's smile was triumphant. "I won the lottery today, Tony. $10 million. The statement hung in the air, incongruous and surreal. Of all the scenarios Tony had imagined driving home, this hadn't been among them. "Congratulations," he said finally, his voice controlled. "But that doesn't explain why this man is in our home at 1 a.m. with our son on his lap." "This is Bradford Klein," Melanie said, moving to stand beside her lover. "And this isn't going to be your home much longer." The bluntness of the statement hit harder than any physical blow. Tony looked from Melanie to Bradford to his mother and son, trying to process what was happening. Rose wouldn't meet his eyes, and Peter looked confused and frightened. Melanie took a deep breath, as if preparing for a speech she'd rehearsed. "You're worthless to us now. You have 30 minutes to grab your pathetic belongings before we change the locks. Bradford will give them everything you never could." The cruelty of the words, delivered in front of their child, sparked something dangerous in Tony's eyes, a flash of fury quickly controlled. Bradford must have seen it because he stepped forward slightly, as if eager for a confrontation. "Don't make this uglier than it needs to be," Bradford advised, his tone patronizing. "Melanie's made her choice. The boy will have a better life with us, and even your mother sees that." He gestured toward Rose, who finally looked up, her expression conflicted. "Is that true, Ma?" Tony asked quietly. Rose shook her head slightly, but remained silent, torn between loyalty to her son and the practical reality of needing care she feared he could no longer provide. Tony was boiling with rage, but walked away silently, heading for the stairs. He needed to think, to plan. Reacting now, in front of Peter, would only make things worse. In their bedroom, he quickly gathered essential documents from his safe, including a copy of their prenuptial agreement. The irony wasn't lost on him. The document he'd signed without complaint, that had been meant to protect Melanie from fortune hunters like him, might now be his salvation. As he collected clothes and personal items, his mind worked with the precision and focus that made him exceptional at his job. Melanie had just made a critical error, one that revealed how little she truly knew him. She thought his silence meant weakness, that he was accepting defeat. She had completely forgotten about the ironclad prenup her wealthy parents had forced him to sign. What Tony didn't let show on his face as he carried his bags downstairs was that the prenup included a crystal-clear infidelity clause, one that Walter Prescott had insisted on to protect his daughter, but that worked both ways. If either party could prove infidelity, the faithful spouse was entitled to a substantial settlement regardless of other assets. And thanks to his friend Vince, Tony had been collecting evidence of Melanie's affair for weeks. Evidence he had been reluctant to confront, but had preserved nonetheless. 30 minutes is generous, Tony said calmly, looking directly at Melanie. "I only need 15. The absence of a fight confused her. "That's it? You're just leaving?" Tony looked at his son, who was watching with wide, frightened eyes. "Peter, come give Dad a hug. I'll see you soon, I promise." Bradford stepped between them. "The boy stays here." Tony's eyes focused on Bradford with such intensity that the larger man actually took a step back. "I'm saying goodbye to my son," Tony said, his voice deadly quiet. "Don't ever stand between us again." Something in his tone made Bradford reconsider. Peter ran to Tony, who knelt and hugged him tightly. "Remember what we talked about when building bridges?" Tony whispered. "Sometimes things have to come apart before they can be fixed properly. I'll be back, buddy. Be brave for me." Peter nodded, tears in his eyes, but trying to be strong. Tony rose, looked once more at Melanie, and walked out without another word. As the door closed behind him, he pulled out his phone and made 2 calls, first to his lawyer, then to Vince. What Melanie mistook for defeat as she watched him drive away was merely Tony doing what he did best, assessing structural damage, calculating load-bearing capacity, and determining precisely how much pressure could be applied before the entire structure came crashing down. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The following 24 hours unfolded like a tactical operation, with Tony moving with unprecedented focus and clarity. He checked into a hotel downtown, met with his lawyer Stuart Greenberg at 7 a.m., and laid out everything: the prenup, the evidence of infidelity, and Melanie's lottery win. Stuart, a shrewd divorce attorney who had been a client on one of Tony's commercial projects, listened carefully before speaking. The timing works in your favor. If she won the lottery before formally separating from you, that's marital property in this state. Combined with the infidelity clause in the prenup, we're looking at a very strong position. Tony nodded, unsurprised. He had studied that prenup like a blueprint, understanding its every clause and condition. "I want full custody of Peter." "That's going to be the battle," Stuart warned. "But her moving another man into the house immediately and the way they ambushed you, that won't play well with family court. I'll file for an emergency hearing today." While Stuart prepared legal documents, Tony met with Vince to formalize the evidence they gathered. Photographs of Melanie entering Bradford's condo building, credit card statements showing hotel charges, text messages Vince had legally obtained through contacts at the phone company. The case was solid. "She's going to fight dirty," Vince warned as they reviewed everything. "People like that always do." Tony's expression didn't change. "Let her." By noon, Tony had arranged a leave of absence from work, secured a temporary apartment, and begun the process of freezing their joint accounts, all before Melanie had even filed her lottery claim. At 3 p.m., as Tony was meeting with a private investigator to dig deeper into Bradford Klein's background, Melanie's name flashed on his phone. He declined the call, watching as it joined 6 previous attempts. By 6 p.m., the count was up to 23 missed calls. It was Stuart who finally took a call from Melanie's hastily hired attorney. "They're scrambling," he reported to Tony afterward. "They didn't expect you to move this fast or have this kind of legal firepower. They're already talking settlement." Tony shook his head. "No settlement. I want everything the law entitles me to, especially custody of my son." By nightfall, the missed calls from Melanie had reached 52, followed by increasingly desperate text messages. "We need to talk. You're making a mistake. Please call me back. You don't understand what's happening." Tony read each one dispassionately, forwarding them to Stuart for the record, but offering no response. The cold calculation of his silence was deliberate. Let her panic. Let her make mistakes. At midnight, as Tony reviewed architectural plans for a new project to keep his mind focused, Melanie's count of desperate missed calls reached 103. Only then did he take a call, not from Melanie, but from Rose. "She's falling apart," his mother reported, her voice low as if afraid of being overheard. "Bradford keeps telling her they need to claim the ticket before it's too late, but her lawyers are saying if she does, you'll be entitled to half." "How's Peter?" Tony asked, ignoring the rest. "Missing you. Confused. He doesn't understand why that man is staying here." Tony's jaw tightened. "Has he been good to Peter at least?" Rose hesitated. "He tries when Melanie's watching. Otherwise, he's impatient with him." "Tony, I don't trust this man." "Neither do I, Ma. Just keep an eye on Peter. This will be over soon." "What are you planning?" Rose asked, knowing her son well enough to recognize the dangerous calm in his voice. "Justice," Tony replied, simply before ending the call. Meanwhile, Melanie paced Bradford's downtown condo, her earlier triumph curdling into anxiety. The day had been a disaster. First, her family lawyer had informed her that yes, the The lottery winnings would likely be considered marital property. Then came the news that Tony had already filed for divorce, citing infidelity with comprehensive evidence. Finally, the emergency custody hearing scheduled for the following week. "Your husband's more resourceful than you gave him credit for," remarked Bradford's attorney, a sleek woman who specialized in high-asset divorces. "And the prenup your parents insisted on has essentially backfired spectacularly." Melanie collapsed onto the sofa, head in her hands. How could this have gone so wrong so quickly? What she didn't say out loud was that she had never seen this side of Tony before. This coldly efficient strategist moving pieces on a board she hadn't even known they were playing on. The quiet, hard-working man she had increasingly dismissed as provincial and unambitious had transformed overnight into a formidable opponent. Bradford paced the room, increasingly agitated. "We need to claim that ticket. The longer we wait, the more time he has to strengthen his position. If I claim it now, he gets half." Melanie snapped. $5 million for a man who didn't even buy the ticket. $5 million is better than nothing, Bradford countered. "And once the divorce is final, we can—" He stopped abruptly, catching himself. But Melanie had heard enough to recognize the calculation in his tone. "We can what, Bradford? Go somewhere he can't find us. Take the money and run." Bradford's silence was damning. For the first time, Melanie wondered if Vince had been right about this man, if his interest had more to do with her family connections and now her lottery win than with Melanie herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Meeting tomorrow. 9 a.m. My office." No excuses. The summons sent a chill through her. Walter Prescott did not tolerate embarrassment or scandal, and Melanie had just created both. The prenup had been his idea, his protection for the Prescott legacy. Now it was being wielded against them, and Walter would not be pleased. As midnight approached, Melanie made her 103rd call to Tony's number, desperate to negotiate, to find some way out of the trap she had unwittingly set for herself. When it went to voicemail yet again, she threw her phone across the room with a cry of frustration. "He won't answer," she said unnecessarily. "Why won't he just talk to me?" Bradford, pouring himself another scotch, didn't look at her as he replied. "Because he doesn't have to. He has all the leverage now." The truth of those words hung in the air between them. In less than 48 hours, the power dynamic of their relationship had completely reversed. Melanie had gone from the one walking away triumphantly to the one desperately seeking a conversation. What she didn't yet understand was that Tony's silence wasn't just tactical. It was the beginning of a carefully orchestrated plan that would ultimately bring both her and Bradford to their knees. And it was only just beginning. Across town, Tony sat in his temporary apartment, reviewing the prenuptial agreement one more time. There was a clause near the end that neither Melanie nor her parents had paid much attention to, a clause his own lawyer had insisted on including. It gave him the right to continue living in their marital home during divorce proceedings if he could prove he was the primary caregiver for any children of the marriage. Tony smiled faintly as he set the document aside and opened his laptop. It was time to compile Peter's medical records, school attendance logs, and the calendar entries showing who had taken him to appointments over the past year. The evidence would show what Tony had always known, that despite his demanding job, he had been a more present parent in his son's life. By morning, he would have everything needed to reclaim his home, his son, and his dignity. Melanie and Bradford had declared war without understanding who they were fighting. It was a mistake they would soon regret deeply. Chapter 7. The Counterattack. Walter Prescott's corner office on the 32nd floor of Prescott Tower commanded a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, a visual reminder of the power he wielded. At 72, he remained an imposing figure, silver-haired, immaculately dressed, with eyes that had evaluated and dismissed countless business rivals. Today, those eyes were fixed on his daughter with cold disappointment. "Explain to me," he said quietly, "how you managed to win $10 million and end up in a worse position than before." Melanie sat rigidly in the visitor's chair, feeling like a chastised child despite being a 39-year-old woman. Bradford had wanted to accompany her, but Walter's instructions had been explicit: come alone. "The timing was unfortunate," she began, trying to sound professional. Unfortunate. Walter cut her off. You bring your lover into your marital home, announce your intentions in front of your child and an elderly woman, and give your husband, who, need I remind you, signed a prenuptial agreement practically designed to reward him in exactly this scenario, a half hour to leave his own house. That's not unfortunate, Melanie. That's catastrophically stupid. The bluntness of his assessment stung, but Melanie couldn't argue. In the cold light of day, her actions seemed reckless, even to herself. The lawyers say I can still negotiate, she offered weakly. Walter laughed, a short, humorless sound. Your husband hasn't responded to 103 calls. He's not interested in negotiating. He's out for blood, and frankly, I don't blame him. He pushed a folder across his desk. Our investigators looked into your friend. Bradford Klein has quite a history. 3 divorces, all from wealthy women. Fraud allegations at his last firm. A pattern of living beyond his means. Did you know he's been using company resources to day trade? That he's currently underwater on that fancy condo by nearly $500,000. Each revelation felt like another nail in a coffin Melanie hadn't realized she was lying in. I didn't. Of course you didn't, Walter interrupted. Because you were too busy throwing away a solid marriage to a good man, a man I never gave enough credit to, apparently, for this opportunistic parasite. Melanie's eyes filled with tears of frustration. Why are you attacking me? I'm your daughter, and as your father, I'm trying to save you from yourself, Walter snapped. Anthony Russo isn't just some pushover construction worker. He's brilliant, methodical, and now thoroughly motivated to destroy you. Do you have any idea what he's been doing while you've been calling him incessantly? He pushed another folder toward her. Inside were copies of legal filings, affidavits, and most damning, photographs documenting her affair with Bradford going back months, far longer than she had admitted even to herself. He's been building a case, Walter continued, like he builds his structures, with precision, patience, and an architect's eye for detail. And now he's filed for full custody, with a hearing scheduled for Monday. The room seemed to tilt. Full custody? He can't. He can, and he will, Walter interrupted. Unless you start making smarter decisions, starting with getting rid of Bradford Klein. Melanie stared at her father, stunned by his apparent shift of allegiance. You're taking his side? Walter's expression hardened. There are no sides in a disaster, only survivors. Anthony's going to win, Melanie. The only question is how much you'll lose in the process. As Melanie left her father's office, shaken and disoriented, she failed to notice the familiar figure sitting in the lobby, Tony, in a perfectly tailored suit, being warmly greeted by her father's executive assistant. She didn't see them disappear into a conference room where Walter Prescott was waiting, legal documents spread across the table. What she couldn't know was that Tony had requested this meeting weeks ago, before the lottery, before the betrayal, to discuss his concerns about Bradford Klein's influence on Melanie and his suspicious activities within the company. The lottery and Melanie's actions had only accelerated a conversation already scheduled. I underestimated you, Walter acknowledged as Tony took a seat across from him. A mistake I won't make again. Tony nodded once, accepting the tacit apology. I'm not here about Melanie or the divorce. I'm here about Bradford Klein and what he's been doing with your company's investments. For the next hour, Tony laid out evidence compiled by Vince and the private investigator. Documents showing how Bradford had been manipulating property valuations, diverting funds through shell companies, and positioning himself to make a move against Walter himself. He's not just sleeping with your daughter, Tony concluded. He's trying to take your company. Walter studied the evidence, his expression growing stonier by the minute. Why show me this? After what Melanie did. This isn't about Melanie, Tony interrupted. This is about Peter. Your grandson's future is tied to your company's legacy. I won't let a con man like Klein destroy that, no matter how I feel about you or your daughter. The two men regarded each other with new respect, adversaries finding common ground in protecting what mattered most to both of them. What do you propose? Walter finally asked. Tony slid a document across the table, a proposal so meticulous and strategic that it could only have come from an engineer's mind. We're going to give Bradford Klein exactly what he wants, and then we're going to take everything from him. Meanwhile, across town, Bradford was growing increasingly frustrated with Melanie, who had returned from her father's office subdued and distracted. "What did the old man say?" he demanded, pacing the condo. "Did you tell him we need to claim that ticket?" Melanie watched him with new eyes, noticing the desperation beneath his confidence, the calculation behind his charm. "He want me to end things with you." Bradford froze. "And what did you say?" "I said I needed time to think." His reaction was immediate and telling, anger flashing across his face before he controlled it, replacing it with concern. "Think about what? Us? The future we planned." "The future you planned," Melanie corrected quietly. "I never wanted to hurt Tony this way. To keep Peter from his father." Bradford's expression hardened. "Don't tell me you're having second thoughts. It's too late for that. We're in this together now." The possessiveness in his tone, the implicit threat, sent a chill through Melanie. For the first time, she wondered if she had exchanged one cage for another. If Bradford's promises of freedom had been just another trap. What neither of them knew was that Tony's plan was already in motion. A carefully constructed sequence of events designed to exploit Bradford's greed, Melanie's guilt, and the legal machinery they had set in motion with their betrayal. The first domino would fall at exactly 9 a.m. the next day, when the temporary custody hearing would begin. A hearing where Tony would present not just evidence of Melanie's affair, but of Bradford's criminal history, his financial improprieties, and the danger his presence posed to Peter's well-being. It was the opening move in a game neither Melanie nor Bradford realized they were playing. A game where Tony had calculated every variable, anticipated every reaction, and engineered a solution that would not just win him his son, but deliver a justice more complete than either of them could imagine. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The courtroom was smaller than Melanie had expected, making the proceedings feel intimate and suffocating. She sat beside her lawyer, acutely aware of Tony on the other side, calm, composed, and unervingly prepared. Bradford had been barred from attending after Tony's legal team successfully argued his presence would be disruptive. Judge Gloria Martinez, a no-nonsense veteran of family court, reviewed the documents before her with methodical care, occasionally glancing over her reading glasses at the estranged couple. "Before we begin," she said finally, "I want to be clear. My only concern is the well-being of the minor child. Your personal drama is irrelevant except as it affects him. Are we understood?" Both parties nodded. "Mr. Russo, as the petitioner for emergency custody, you may proceed." Tony's lawyer, Stuart Greenberg, approached the bench with a confidence that immediately set Melanie on edge. "Your Honor, we're prepared to demonstrate that Mrs. Russo not only engaged in infidelity, but created an unstable and potentially dangerous environment for their son by moving her paramour into the family home without warning." What followed was a devastating presentation. Medical records showing Tony had taken Peter to 87% of his doctor's appointments over the past year. School attendance logs revealing it was Tony who most often dropped off and picked up their son. Photographs of Bradford's aggressive confrontation when Tony attempted to hug Peter goodbye. Most damaging were the background checks on Bradford, revealing not just his financial troubles and previous fraud allegations, but 2 restraining orders from ex-wives and a sealed juvenile record that Tony's investigator had somehow accessed. This man, Stewart emphasized, is now sleeping in the same house as a 5-year-old boy, despite having no legal relationship to him and a history of violent outbursts when his financial schemes are threatened. By the time Melanie's lawyer rose to respond, the damage was done. Her defense, that Melanie had always been a loving mother, that the affair was a mistake born of unhappiness, seemed hollow against the mountain of evidence Tony had compiled. "Your Honor," Melanie's lawyer concluded weakly, "we request joint custody with Mrs. Russo as the primary caregiver." Judge Martinez studied Melanie over her glasses. "Mrs. Russo, did you introduce your son to Mr. Klein before informing your husband of the relationship?" Yes, but did you move Mr. Klein into the family home the same night you asked your husband to leave?" "There were circumstances." "Did you tell your husband," and I quote, "you're worthless to us now in front of your child?" Melanie's eyes filled with tears. "I was upset. I didn't mean." Judge Martinez held up a hand, stopping her. I've heard enough. She turned to Tony. Mr. Russo, are you still residing in a temporary apartment? No, Your Honor. I've secured a 2-bedroom apartment near Peter's school. His room is already set up. The judge nodded. Here's my ruling. Temporary sole physical custody is awarded to Mr. Russo, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Russo twice weekly. Mr. Klein is not to be present during these visitations. Additionally, Mrs. Russo is ordered to have Mr. Klein vacate the family home within 48 hours, after which Mr. Russo may return there with the child if he chooses. The gavel fell with finality, and Melanie felt her world collapse further. As they rose to leave, she finally caught Tony's eye, expecting to see triumph, but finding only a cold determination that frightened her more than anger would have. Outside the courtroom, as reporters gathered, news of the lottery win having leaked, Melanie approached Tony directly for the first time since that night. Tony, please, she began, her voice breaking. This has gone too far. We need to talk. His response was quiet enough that only she could hear. You had your chance to talk. 103 chances, in fact. Now you'll listen. Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her to face the reporter's questions alone. That evening, as Bradford raged through the house, throwing things and demanding Melanie fight back harder, she sat numb on the sofa. The man before her seemed nothing like the sophisticated businessman who had promised her a better life. His mask had slipped, revealing something ugly and desperate beneath. We need to claim that ticket, he insisted for the 100th time. Before he takes that too. It's too late, Melanie said dully. If I claim it now, it's marital property. He gets half. Half is better than nothing, Bradford shouted, his face contorted with frustration. At least we'd have something to fight with. Though he struck Melanie like a slap. There was no we anymore. Bradford's interest in her had clearly been contingent on what she could provide him. Now, with her parental rights diminished and her inheritance threatened, she was rapidly becoming a liability rather than an asset. Her phone rang, her father's ringtone. When she answered, Walter's voice was unusually gentle. It's time to come home, Melanie. The unexpected compassion broke something inside her. Daddy, I've made such a mess. Yes, he agreed simply. But you're still a Prescott. We clean up our messes. As Melanie ended the call, she found Bradford watching her intently. What did he want? He's offering me a way out, she said carefully. Bradford's expression shifted, calculation replacing anger. What kind of way out? I need to go see him, Melanie replied, already gathering her purse. Alone. Like hell. Bradford snapped, blocking her path. You're not making deals without me. For the first time, Melanie felt afraid of him, of the possessiveness in his eyes, the entitlement in his stance. Move, Bradford. Not until you tell me what you're planning. The standoff was interrupted by the doorbell. Bradford yanked the door open to find Vincent Moretti standing there, his police badge visible on his belt. Bradford Klein, Vince asked, though he clearly knew the answer. What do you want? Vince handed him an envelope. You've been served with a lawsuit from Prescott Holdings for fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of company resources. Additionally, this is a restraining order preventing you from approaching Walter Prescott, any Prescott property, or Melanie Russo outside of court proceedings. Bradford's face drained of color as he scanned the documents. This is bullshit. You can't. I'm just a messenger, Vince interrupted, his gaze finding Melanie behind Bradford. Though I should mention, Mrs. Russo, your father asked me to escort you to his office if you'd like. The offer was a lifeline Melanie hadn't expected. She stepped forward, ignoring Bradford's attempt to grab her arm. I would like that, detective. As they walked to Vince's car, leaving Bradford's sputtering threats behind them, Melanie felt a strange combination of defeat and relief. Did Tony arrange this? Vince's expression gave nothing away. Tony's focused on Peter right now. This is between you and your father. What Vince didn't tell her was that Tony had indeed orchestrated everything. The lawsuit, the restraining order, even this well-timed extraction. It was all part of the plan he had presented to Walter Prescott. A plan designed not just to win the divorce, but to systematically dismantle the threat Bradford posed to everyone involved. Meanwhile, at Walter's penthouse, Tony sat across from his former father-in-law, Rose and Peter safely ensconced in another room with Diana Prescott, who had taken an immediate grandmotherly interest in the boy she had rarely seen. "She's on her way," Walter confirmed, hanging up the phone. "Your detective friend is bringing her." Tony nodded, his expression unreadable. And Klein, served with both the lawsuit and the restraining order. He'll be in panic mode now, looking for a way out. Good. That's when people like him make mistakes. Tony stood, straightening his jacket. "I should go before she arrives. Peter needs this time with his grandparents without the complication of seeing me here." Walter studied the younger man with newfound respect. "You're not what I expected, Anthony. I thought you'd want revenge against Melanie at any cost." Tony's smile was faint but genuine. "This isn't about revenge, Walter. It's about justice, for Peter, for your company, even for Melanie in a way. Some structures can't be saved once the foundation is compromised, but sometimes you can salvage enough to build something better." As Tony left through a private elevator, neither man knew that Bradford Klein was already making his predicted mistake, breaking into Melanie's email account, finding the communication from the Lottery Commission, and formulating a desperate plan to claim the ticket himself. The final phase of Tony's strategy was about to begin, triggered by the very greed and panic he had calculated would be Bradford's downfall. Chapter 9. The Resolution. The headlines exploded across Boston the next morning. Lottery fraud. Man attempts to claim $10 million with stolen ticket. Prescott heiress's lover arrested in lottery scheme. Family court drama. Engineer wins custody as wife's affair implodes. Bradford Klein had made exactly the mistake Tony had anticipated. Desperate and cornered, he had attempted to claim Melanie's lottery ticket using a forged power of attorney document, a crime that had resulted in his immediate arrest when lottery officials, already alerted to potential fraud, contacted authorities. For Melanie, waking in her childhood bedroom in her parents' penthouse, the news was the final collapse of a life she had tried to build with Bradford. Watching the coverage on television, seeing his mugshot alongside stories detailing both the lottery fraud and the Prescott Company lawsuit, she finally understood the full extent of her misjudgment. "He never loved me," she said quietly as her mother brought her tea. Diana Prescott, elegant even in her distress, sat beside her daughter. "Men like that don't love, dear. They acquire." The simple truth of it brought fresh tears. "How did I not see it?" "Because you were looking for an escape," Diana replied with unusual insight, "from a life that felt smaller than what you'd imagined for yourself." Melanie looked up, surprised by her mother's perception. "I thought you never understood." "I understand more than you think. Why do you think I pushed so hard for you to maintain your career after marriage? It wasn't just about the Prescott name. It was about giving you space to be more than someone's wife and mother." She took Melanie's hand. "But happiness isn't found in escape, darling. It's built day by day in the life you choose to create." The wisdom of those words stayed with Melanie as she prepared to face what came next. A meeting with Tony, arranged by their lawyers for noon at the neutral ground of Stuart Greenberg's office. Tony arrived precisely on time, as he always did. The man who entered the conference room bore little resemblance to the shell-shocked husband who had walked away from their home 5 days earlier. He moved with quiet confidence, his tailored suit and composed demeanor projecting a strength Melanie had always known he possessed, but had somehow forgotten to respect. "Thank you for coming," she began as they sat across from each other, only their lawyers present. Tony nodded, but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I know no apology can undo what I've done," Melanie continued, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "But I am sorry, Tony, not just for the betrayal, but for failing to see who you really are, who we could have been." Tony studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I didn't ask for this meeting to hear apologies, Melanie. I came to discuss terms." The formal language stung, but Melanie recognized it as necessary. "What terms?" Stuart slid a document across the table, a divorce agreement so comprehensive it accounted for every possible scenario, including the lottery winnings. In summary, Tony explained as Melanie scanned the pages, "I'm requesting full legal and physical custody of Peter, with generous visitation rights for you. The prenup's infidelity clause entitles me to a $2 million settlement from your family's assets. As for the lottery winnings, I'm entitled to half as marital property. Melanie waited for the other shoe to drop. And nothing, Tony replied. That's what the law provides, and that's what I'm requesting. Her lawyer leaned forward, surprised. You're not asking for punitive damages? For full claim to the lottery, given the circumstances. Tony shook his head. This isn't about punishment. It's about fairness. Melanie made mistakes, serious ones, but vindictiveness won't help Peter adjust to his new reality. The reasonableness of his position, when he could have legally destroyed her, left Melanie speechless. Why? She finally managed. Because despite everything, Tony said quietly, we built something together once. It didn't last, but Peter is the foundation we created, and he deserves parents who can at least be civil to each other. Tears filled Melanie's eyes. I don't deserve this kindness. It's not kindness, Tony corrected her. It's pragmatism. We'll be connected through Peter for the rest of our lives. We can make that connection a battlefield or a bridge. I'm choosing a bridge. As the meeting concluded, with both parties agreeing to the terms pending final review, Tony rose to leave. Melanie stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. What about the house? She asked. The agreement doesn't mention it. Tony's smile held a hint of the warmth she remembered from their early days. I never wanted that house, Melanie. It was always your dream, not mine. I've found a place Peter and I can make our own. Something solid, built to last. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. As he turned to go, she asked one final question. How did you know? About Bradford, about the lottery claim, about all of it. Tony paused at the door. I build things for a living, Melanie. That means understanding how systems work, where the pressure points are, how materials respond to stress. People aren't so different from buildings in that way. With that, he was gone, leaving Melanie with the realization that she had never truly known the man she had married. His depths, his capacity for both strategic thinking and measured forgiveness. 3 months later, as Tony helped Peter adjust the model skyscraper they had built together in their new apartment, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Bradford Klein sentenced to 7 years for fraud, embezzlement. The case had been swift and devastating, with evidence provided by both Prescott Holdings and the Lottery Commission creating an airtight prosecution. Bradford's attempts to shift blame to Melanie had backfired spectacularly when Walter Prescott produced recordings of Bradford's proposals to defraud the company. Who's that, Dad? Peter asked, noticing Tony's phone. No one important, Tony replied, setting the phone aside. Just someone who made poor choices. Later that evening, after Peter was asleep, Tony sat on his balcony overlooking the city he had helped build, piece by piece. His own choices had led him here, to a new life constructed from the remnants of the old, stronger for having been tested. His phone rang, Vince calling with an update on Rose, who was now comfortably settled in an upscale care facility that Tony could easily afford with his share of the lottery winnings. The irony wasn't lost on him. Money that had been meant to separate him from his family had instead provided security for his mother and son. Across town, in her new condo purchased with her remaining lottery winnings, Melanie sat with her father reviewing proposals for a charitable foundation they were establishing together, her attempt to create something meaningful from her second chance. Tony approved the educational scholarship program for children of construction workers, she told Walter, still surprised by the continued civility of their co-parenting relationship. Walter nodded approvingly. He's a good man, better than either of us gave him credit for. Yes, Melanie agreed, her expression thoughtful. He always was. The prenuptial agreement that had been meant to protect Melanie had ultimately saved them both, providing Tony with justice without vengeance and giving Melanie consequences without destruction. The ironclad document, like the man who had signed it without complaint 7 years earlier, had proven to be built on principles that could withstand even the most unexpected pressures. In the end, it wasn't luck that determined their fates, but character, revealed not in victory or defeat, but in how each of them chose to rebuild from the ruins of what they had once shared. For Tony, that meant creating a new foundation for himself and his son. For Melanie, It meant learning that true wealth wasn't found in escaping one's life, but in taking responsibility for building it with integrity. And for Peter, caught between them but loved by both, it meant understanding what his father had taught him about bridges, that sometimes things have to come apart before they can be fixed properly, stronger than before. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.